Hello and welcome. This is the Public Affairs Forum, sponsored by the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin, Texas. My name is Luther Elmore. Most Sundays we hold these Public Affairs Forums at our church location, 4700 Grover Avenue, which is located in north central Austin. We've been conducting these forums since the incorporation of this church in 1954. These are held regularly to nourish the mind and spirit and to serve social justice. We'd invite you to join us here at the church on Sundays for these forums. They're free and open to the public, and the advantage of that, of you being with us, is that indeed you could ask your own questions of our presenters. If you have questions about our church or future presentations, you can access our church website at austinuu.org. Today we're delighted to have our speaker, Jeremy Schwartz, an investigative reporter with the Austin American-Statesman. He is a member of the Statesman investigating team, and he has done tremendous reports regarding veterans' access to health care and the VA's evasion of accountability. He's investigated the failure of Texas agricultural growers to provide adequate housing and sanitation for farm workers. And as a result of that, the failure of state agencies in the state of Texas to monitor those activities. He's looked at the negative consequences of the proposed border wall, both on residents, local commerce, and the ecological systems. He served as a Statesman's correspondent in Mexico City from 2005 to 2009, covering politics, drug violence, and immigration issues. Mr. Schwartz has won a first place award from the Texas Associated Press Managing Editors for Best Online Project in 2015 for a failure about a failed Department of Veterans Affairs brain research program. He also won a first place award for deadline writing for a story on the 2014 South by Southwest automobile crash. He took third place as Reporter of the Year, an honorable mention in the Freedom of Information category for his story on the Interior Border Patrol traffic stops. Today we're delighted to welcome to our forum Mr. Jeremy Schwartz. Jeremy.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to get to talk to you a little bit about what we do at the Statesman in terms of investigating reporting and what our team does. We have a 5-person investigative team that was formed in 2011, and at the time was one of the largest investigative teams at a Texas newspaper. And over those years, obviously the newsrooms across the country have declined, and the Statesman is no exception. The size of the investigative team has remained stable, so that commitment to investigative journalism has remained, even though the Statesman, along with other papers, is facing very difficult economic times. And I think a main reason why the Statesman is investing so heavily in investigative journalism is feedback that it gets from people like you, from residents and readers. We are told, when we almost get consulted to death at this point of trying to figure out what readers want. But one thing that is sort of steadfast throughout the years is readers wanting investigative journalism. You may have heard that the paper is been put up for sale by our parent company, Cox Communications, which has owned the Statesman for several decades. I can't tell you that much, except that our hope, obviously, is that whoever buys the paper continues the commitment to investigative journalism, and there certainly are newspaper groups out there that share that belief. There's some other ones not so much, but hopefully we'll get lucky. So the way that we work, there's five reporters. Each one of us sort of has areas of specialty. Myself, it tends to be sort of veterans issues, military, border security issues. But then once or twice a year, we come together and we do a big joint project, and that's usually a series that lasts for several days. And the first one that we did on that was a project called Uncounted Casualties, which looked at the deaths of Texas veterans who were coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan, dying early deaths. And it was one of the first, journalism pieces of journalism that identified this incredible rise in the prescribing of opioids and narcotic painkillers to veterans and the role that they were playing in these deadly overdoses. So what I was hoping to do today is walk you through a couple of recent investigations that I've worked on and sort of what goes into it, a little bit about how we do it, and then obviously take some questions from you guys. So we can go to the next slide. So last year, as was mentioned, we did a project on farm worker housing in Texas. And one of the first cases we came across was at AJK Farms in Van Horn, and this was a chili farm. And so they needed a crew to come in and harvest their chilies in the middle of the summer. I believe it was July. So they brought in a crew of farm workers, I believe from El Paso. When they got to this ranch, this farm, which is in the middle of nowhere, it's very difficult to access, they found that their housing consisted of storage containers. And these are the containers that you see on the back of an 18-wheeler or a cargo ship. They were filled with junk. No working screens, so bugs were flying in. No ventilation, no AC. As bad a living situation as you can imagine. So what they ended up doing was setting up these outdoor beds, which is a big tractor trailer tire with a tabletop placed over it, and there were several of these which served as beds for the workers. This housing situation is completely illegal. If you are going to be providing housing for farm workers, it has to meet certain very basic levels of sanitation and cleanliness and safety. Nothing over the top, screens that work, toilets that work, enough space to cook and clean, which obviously was not the case here. So we started looking into the state agency that regulates this. Pretty quickly, we got their inspection reports for going back a decade, and pretty quickly found that the state is inspecting sort of a small group of growers up in the panhandle, but for the most part leaves the rest of the state unregulated. There aren't inspectors going out doing inspections in wide swaths of the state, especially not down in Van Horn, down in the Uvalde area, Fremont, places where we've had some very bad cases of housing exploitation. So not only that, but even on the ones that they do inspect, when they find a failing situation, they do nothing about it. And so one of the first impacts of the story was we were coming across cases where it was a failed inspection. The inspector had put on there that they had failed the inspection, yet they were issuing licenses to the growers or to the operators with the promise that they would fix whatever it was that was going wrong. And so when we brought that to their attention, they made a change in that policy. But for the most part, they weren't taking any action against any operator, no matter what. And so even this case of AJK Farms, the worst thing that a lot of folks in the industry had seen in quite a while, there's no fine, no penalty, no no repercussion for this at all. So you can imagine sort of the message that sends to other facility operators that what's the incentive to get legal and to have humane, livable conditions if the state is not going to do a thing about it. So our you can go to the next. Our reporting then took us up to a town called Plainview, up in the South Plains and the Panhandle, where we found sort of almost the next level of what was happening in terms of housing, where labor contractors were putting people up in motels. Low-income housing is very hard to come by in these rural areas. And so the hotels in these small towns have begun to play this role of farm worker housing. And so we were able to get into this room. It was a farm worker, his wife and his two boys lived there. They did not want their names used because they were worried that if CPS found out about the way that they were living, that they would lose their kids. And so you basically had one room covered with cockroaches. They had bottles of Raid sort of set up in arm's distance of, wherever you might be, so you could grab it and use it. But the kids, certainly were subject to that. At night, they could not. They had an AC unit, which didn't really work, so at night they had to leave the door open. So all those mosquitoes and bugs would fly in. The back, you can see there's the kitchen there, and there's a toilet off to the side, was this waft of sewage smell. I think it was probably the motel's sewage drain, and who knows what it was draining into. But that was the conditions that we found, and this is just a taste of what we saw. And obviously, the health of farm workers is hugely important, as they're the ones that are picking our fruits and vegetables in our food. So you want people doing that work to be in good health. You can go to the next. So we published our article in March of 2016. It was called Unlivable. And it got a lot of attention from lawmakers who expressed their outrage over the situation. One of the things we also found was that the state only spends $2,000 to inspect these facilities. Other states are spending over $1 million. So it's sort of a joke. It's a program that's been starved. It's on the books, but it doesn't really exist in a real meaningful way. So there was bills written that would overhaul that inspection process, make it a real inspection process, get inspectors who could go out into the state and find these places. That is sort of the key here, is to find these illegally operating places and then do something about it. You can go to the next slide. The session, as you guys probably know, was not a real favorable session for any bill that had the word migrant in the title. Even though we tried to make the case, we actually in our stories called these farm workers migratory farm workers, that they move from place to place to pick crops. A large number of them are U.S. citizens, are legal residents that live, a lot of them along the border, but travel during spring and summer months throughout Texas and do this work. And they are technically migrant farm workers, but they're migratory farm workers, and they are legal residents, and they are U.S. citizens. This is a picture of some bugs that were collected at a facility in Fremont that were all put together in a jar and shown to lawmakers just as a sense of what folks are dealing with. The bills One of them came out of a committee unanimously. None of them made it to the floor of the legislature, either the Senate or the House. And it wasn't a huge surprise. The dynamics in this session were not favorable by any stretch. The one silver lining was that there was, one of the lawmakers was able to slip a rider into the budget that raised the budget for the inspection process to $10,000, from $2,000 to $10,000. So it was a quintupling of the budget, but really, what are you going to do with $10,000? So there's hopes that this will come back up in future sessions, but we'll see. And so one of the interesting things about that story was that the reporting process on that led almost directly to our next project that we did last year. And while I was in Plainview reporting, I was in the hotel, and on the bedside table they had one of those Chamber of Commerce magazines that has like the list of all the local officials, your county auditor and your city council people and their headshots, and it's about 25 people. And I knew that Plainview was a majority Hispanic city and had been for a long time. And there was one single official who was Hispanic on that list. And so it got us thinking about the towns and counties around Texas where this massive disparity exists, where you have very large Latino populations and hardly any, if any, representation. So we sort of set out to look for the places with the biggest gaps in representation and figure out what that meant. Why was it happening, and what does that mean for the people that live in those places? And just a couple numbers that came out of the project, that more than 1.3 million Hispanics in Texas live in cities or counties with no Hispanic representation on their city council or commissioner's court. And then, sort of the idea was like, well, yeah, it's representation is small, but it's getting better, right? I mean, the population is growing. Maybe it's a slow process, but it's happening, and we'll get there. We found that on the county commissioner level, between 1994 and 2015 or 2016, over that time, the Hispanic population doubled in Texas. The percentage of Latinos on county commissions went from 10% to 13%. So basically a stagnation, and a lot of it has to do with some very particular dynamics that are happening in these small towns and small counties. And so one of the counties with the largest disparities was a place called Deaf Smith County, up in the Panhandle near the border of New Mexico. This is a county with 70% Hispanic population. Its commissioner's court has 0 Latino members. And so when we went up there, we found a place called San Jose Community, which is a Hispanic community, long time, it's been around probably 80, 90 years, that suffers from a terrible, terrible flooding issue. There's a place called La Playa, which is a field right in front of the community, and every time there's a heavy rain, it floods, and big floods. People's houses flood. The county was, I think if you go to the next one, we can see some of these folks. This here is the playa behind Irene, and that's what fills up with water every time. And the neighborhood is just sort of in back of it here. And so the county, the last time it had a major flood, said, that's it, we're sick of cleaning up after every flood. we don't think you guys should live here, and our advice to you is to move out because we are not going to clean this up anymore. Next time it happens, you know, you're on your own. Yeah, you can scroll down. And if you go down a little bit more, there's a woman, a little bit more, little more, little more, little more, her right there. And this is Isabel Garcia, who lives in San Jose, and you know, is outraged that this is happening and frustrated that the county commissioners court will not listen. They go to try to talk to them about ways to mitigate the flooding over there. They don't want to hear it. So she is thinking about running for county commissioner herself, and it's a daunting idea for her. I mean, she has no experience fundraising. There's barely a sort of a political group to plug into. She would be going up against a long, well-established power structure in Deaf Smith County. But for things to change there, it's going to be people like her that really believe in it and that sort of harness that energy that is out there, but it hasn't been sort of focused yet. We also looked at some places closer to Central Texas, and one of the places we looked at was Hondo, which is in Medina County, which is right outside Bexar County in San Antonio. And Hondo jumped on our radar because Medina County, again, majority Hispanic, 0 Hispanics on the Commissioner's Court. And the city of Hondo, a large Hispanic majority, had not had a competitive political race for about 5 years. The same folks, same incumbents, just put their name in, and they didn't even have elections. No need to have an election. So we were curious as to why that happened. And so if we go to the next one, we're going to try to make this work. And if you scroll down, yeah, right up there. This is a video that we put together ourselves and our colleagues at Awry, which is the Spanish language paper.
We saw an opportunity that, that we could take the majority, in the city council in particular, that in 2008 there was 3 positions that were up, and we talked about it and we convinced ourselves that it was an opportunity, and we won. The community was very excited about it. Some of the things that we did here, for example, was, we gave the workers a hefty raise. We're in the process of implementing a living wage here for the city workers.
And then we were accused of being fiscally irresponsible because they claimed that we were going to break the city.
And that because of our programs, the way they looked, and they would say, it looks like socialism.
And that's why they initiated that recall, to get us out of the way because they didn't like what we were doing. We really didn't expect that, because we went in there, we won fair and square. The people turned out and voted us in. But then they started organizing, and they formed a petition. Well, they used to call us a trio. And so it was directed at all the 3 members instead of being individually by place.
And at the end, we lost by 36 votes, because of the fact that people in the community, the Mexican community, couldn't understand, that they had voted for us, and we had won significantly. A lot of people, they said they weren't interested in voting anymore, because they felt that people over there at City Hall could do whatever they wanted to.
We went out to vote and won the majority vote, but yet, again, we were put on the sidelines. It was taken from us. This town wants change, but it seems like the people that are up in the courts or in the higher positions have a way of denying it.
But I think even the Anglo population were, after they got through it, I think a lot of them were kind of disgusted with the whole episode. And those thinking Anglos, those that's free of the bigotry, and then a lot of them signed the petition for a recall because they were asked to, and they didn't want to say no because they felt like that they may be dumped in there like they did me about we're supporting the Mexicans. See, if you didn't sign, well, you must be a Mexican lover or something.
And so it was 5 years in a row that we did political work, and then it's been like 6 years now that at City Hall, nobody has run, and people just basically walk in there, But now we're getting reorganized again.
You cannot have a democracy without participation. If you tempt that and without participation, invariably you wind up with an oligarchy. And that's what we have here now, an oligarchy.
The majority of the community is satisfied with the city and its government. And otherwise, I think we'd have more people running for office rather than having the uncontested elections like we've had the last 3 or 4 years.
It's going to take some time to get people to realize what power the people have, because people groups of people are very powerful whenever they get together and organize themselves and become a voice, and that's what people have to realize and understand.
It's a struggle, and that you got to fight till the end. I'm not going to stop fighting till the day I die.
Yeah, so that was Hondo, we went to a few other places in the state, Abilene, Odessa, Guadalupe County here, and that's what we found in a lot of places. There were actions, there were things that happened that you could trace back to the lack of political participation and representation, and it's a lot more complicated than, folks aren't voting. And so our story came out, and as I was saying, it was a real partnership with Awry, which is our Spanish language paper. And it was the first time that we had a bilingual headline on a big investigative project. Silent majority, mayoría silenciosa. And, we definitely, heard from some critics about that who didn't like seeing Spanish on the top of the Statesman. But for us, it was important to get this story out and the message out to as many people as we could in both languages. And it was, the Statesman was named the paper of the year last year by the Texas APME, and this project was the one that they cited in giving the paper that honor. So it was a story that needed to be heard, and in some ways we saw other papers do local versions of it. There was a paper in Amarillo that looked at what was going on up there. So it's just sort of a small part of a chain, but that was that. There was a couple more things that we've done more recently. I'm not sure how much time I have, but we've done some stuff on the border wall. I spent a lot of time down in the valley looking at the proposals. And if you go 2 more, I think, yeah. And one of the things that we uncovered was there's a firm down there which actually operates throughout the state called Dannenbaum Engineering. It's actually under FBI investigation right now. They built the border wall in Hidalgo County down in the valley the last go round back in 08, 09. This time around, they actually partnered with Hidalgo County, with the Hidalgo County judge and various other officials there to come up with a proposal for the Trump administration, which the people of Hidalgo County, when they found out, were absolutely that their officials had participated in this. And sure enough, they sent this to Department of Homeland Security, and sure enough, it was basically what was adopted. Department of Homeland Security adopted this Dannenbaum plan, which would finish the walling off of Hidalgo County. It fills in every gap that there is in Hidalgo County at a huge cost associated. So we've been sort of looking around into this situation and have filed open records requests asking for communications and emails and reports between the county, the county and Dannenbaum, because they were definitely working in concert to get these wall plans. So that is sort of some more recent stuff. We've got a lot of interesting stuff planned for next year, for 2018, if not earlier. This is a project we worked on called A Question of Restraint, which looked into how suspects were dying in police custody, not being shot, but dying after being restrained. Tased, restrained, sometimes they're hogtied. And even in cases where the medical examiners concluded that it was the restraint that killed the suspect, or the actions of the police, we, out of the hundreds of cases, I believe there's maybe one indictment, but for the most part, the norm was no indictment, no criminal action, and not even any internal discipline, which is a much lower bar. And in I would say 95% of the cases, there was no internal discipline, even though something had obviously gone very wrong during the arrest. So, and this individual was a really tragic case of a young kid who was high on LSD, had gotten arrested, and was in the back of a cop car and was tased throughout his body, but including on his genitals. He was dead by the time they got to the police station. And we found the DA had not even opened up a case against anyone when he died initially a few years ago. But after the story ran, that case was reopened, and it was a new DA is over there who is looking at this case, because there's some pretty damning evidence. There's some audio of an officer threatening to kill him, frustrated with the way he was acting and sort of out of control, but it led to his death. So that's sort of what I had prepared. But if you guys have any questions, happy to take them.
Thank you, Jeremy. We have about 20 minutes left, so if you have a question, please hold up your hand. Keep your question short and to the point so that he can answer as many questions as possible. And identify yourself when I come to you.
Thank you very much. I read all of your articles.
Oh, great, thank
I'm
you.
a paper reader. Don't watch the news on TV.
I'd love to hear that.
Is the
Would you please identify yourself?
My name's Mary Patrick. The agency that oversees the $2,000 or now $10,000 inspections, which agency is that?
It's the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs,
Okay,
TDHCA.
thank you.
And did you have any reaction with the officials from that agency?
Yes. We had a lot of back and forth before the story came out. I think their bottom line argument was that they are doing the best they can with the money and the resources that they have. And for the most part, you could agree with that. There was cases where inspectors were looking the other way, but you also have to know these inspectors are manufactured home inspectors. That's what they do for their job, and so they do this 1 or 2 days a year. You know, they're not as though they're fully trained up on this. So if you want to put blame, the blame to me has to come from who is feeding this inspection program.
Does the Department of Agriculture have any oversight, anything going on in this area? No?
Of the housing, no. There was, one of the proposals after this came out was to move the inspection process to the Department of Agriculture, because they apparently do go out quite a bit into ranches and farms, and there are other things that they inspect. And so the idea is that if they're out there already, they can be on the lookout for any sort of unusual housing or unreported housing situations. I think there was also a feeling that among some of the advocates, if it went to the Department of Agriculture, how seriously would it be taken, how seriously Sid Miller would take enforcing these regulations.
My name is Elaine. I do have a follow-up to that. Is there anything that the people in this room can do in terms of the situation with the migrants?
Well, there are groups that, it might be possible to connect with. Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid is probably at the tip of the spear on this. They have somebody whose job it is to go out and find these places. But one of the things that they're lacking too is getting the word out, both to growers and to the farm workers themselves, that they have these protections. And so what was originally envisioned was almost a PR program where, in the stores or in the laundromats in these little towns where there's a lot of migrant farm worker housing and activity, flyers that say, these are your rights. Do you know that you have a right to an inspected housing facility? And if you don't, call this number. So the state is not going to be doing that. That 10,000 is not going to be enough for that. And I don't know if the Rio Grande Legal Aid has plans for that, but that may be somewhere where, sort of on the ground, you might be able to work with them.
Jeremy, you had also mentioned that you had done an investigative reporting on the Veterans Department of Veteran Affairs. Could you comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, a lot of the work that I did on the VA was thanks to whistleblowers within the VA. One who told me about it was a research program up in Waco that was supposed to be doing cutting-edge MRI research on veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And they had this top-of-the-line mobile MRI unit, and they were going to take it to Fort Hood, and they were going to study the vets, study them before they left, and then when they came back from their deployments, they were going to study them again, and it was going to get at the changes, physical changes in the brains that happen in combat. It was a fantastic idea. It would have been cutting-edge research. What happened was they never used that MRI and messed around and all sorts of internal divisions. But the bottom line was that MRI was never used for like 6 years. And by the time they just got it back online, obviously the war in Iraq is over. There's activity in Afghanistan. But Fort Hood used to be ground zero for deployments. This is where everybody was going. People from units from across the country would deploy out of Fort Hood. And that's not the case anymore. There's still some units that go. So they have missed this historical chance to do this kind of research. And so it would almost take, and it was like a perfect situation, perfect scenario. So it would almost take another war for them to have that situation where they could do that again. So this was a very frustrated employee in the VA who saw this, waste going on, and who got in touch with me. And what he did was tell me, he didn't come to me with documents, but he came to me knowing exactly what I needed to ask for on a Freedom of Information Act request. And so did that and got tons of stuff, and wrote a thing that the OIG, the Office of Inspector General, came back 2 years later and basically confirmed it all. And sort of the aggravating thing, which seems to happen every time you deal with the VA, was that there was no accountability. Nobody was reprimanded, nobody was fired because of it. It's almost like they see it as a natural disaster, when that's definitely not the case. And I've had some other stuff with schedulers at the VA who have gotten in touch with me and given me documents. And it's covering the VA. It gets political. It gets politicized because it is an institution in need of help, in need of reform. But there is an entire movement that is sort of seeking to privatize the VA and to dismantle the VA, and that seizes on every scandal and every problem as more evidence that the VA should be disassembled. And I don't think anybody, unless who's not way out on the extreme, believes that. I mean, the VA is set up uniquely to deal with veterans and their needs. And yes, it has a lot of problems. So that's something as a reporter, you wade into. And people say, well, why, get it on both sides. Why are you picking on the VA? What do you want to? You want to be part of the dismantling of it? And on the other side, why aren't you pushing for privatization? So, but to me, it's an agency that needs a lot of scrutiny. It deserves a lot of scrutiny, but my hope is that the scrutiny is used for good, and that it helps the agency.
My name is Laurel Scott, and my question is, given that the wealth of stories possible and the limits of your team, how do you go about deciding what to pursue and what not?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Because it is, when you pick a story, you're potentially giving up the next few months to chase down that story. So we try to look at ones that are going to have impact. I think that's sort of become our one of our top criteria for that. Is it something that can bring about change? Is it something that can affect change in some way, as opposed to being something interesting or sort of archaic, but only affects a few people? We dig a lot of dry holes when we do this. Not every story idea turns into something. So we dig a lot of dry holes, and part of it too is to know when to give it up. Sort of the worst thing you can do is keep digging, just stubbornly go, and then at the end, you spent months on that. So, but as a team, we help each other with that. That's one of the valuable things about having the team, is that you get input, from other folks.
Hi, I'm Glenn Williams. We're seeing a lot of privatization both in state and federal government. When that occurs, how does that affect your ability to conduct investigations?
It's a very important question, and you're seeing a little bit of that now with the city council and the city manager kerfuffle, because you've got the city is basically using arguments from private industry to block access. But when we look at the detention centers, they're in private hands, and even though by law what they produce is publicly available, doesn't always work that way. And they get a chance to review everything and say, oh, we think this could hurt our competitive advantage, or this is a trade secret, or, you know, especially with money amounts. You know, they don't want to tell you how much they spent to build this place, or, you know. So yeah, no, it's a scary thing. And if it expands, and I think if the City of Austin deal, if they were to prevail in court, which would basically be that they can act like a private corporation and shield their trade secrets, then I think that's a very dangerous slope. And I think that's why you see the Statesman fighting it so hard. And there's been, you know, some people are like, why is the Statesman, you know, spending all this effort and time chasing down the finalists for the city manager? Nobody knows who they are anyways, nobody cares. But it's the principle of them being able to use this Boeing exception, which was, you know, Boeing aircraft is set precedent on this by not revealing some documents because they said it would hurt their competitive advantage. So if the city can do that, you can imagine the sort of the possibilities of where they could go with that. You know, we're not going to tell you how much we're going to spend on fixing MOPAC because that could, you know, hurt us when we are negotiating with our next, for our next project. So.
Dan Dow, I had a question, you touched on it earlier. As print media goes down in availability, how does that change your journalism in terms of things going online and then multimedia and things like that?
You mean sort of how do we respond to like the influence of the web and digital? You know, I think we're at the point where our main focus really at this point is web and digital. You know, the print product is still important, but much more effort at this point is going into building nice presentations, online presentations for stories and doing, you know, data work that's strictly online. But really interesting, you know, we can build, you know, interactive maps and spreadsheets that people can use themselves. You know, it's an opportunity for these longer form pieces. If you go back 10 years and what they look like, you would just find text and photos. And now you've got all kinds of kind of interesting things to play with within the story. The other side of that is the web, you know, as a taskmaster, and we've got a whole part of the newsroom that is based on responding to that and getting things out instantaneously and in a way that gets a lot of clicks. So yeah, it's good and bad.
Kind of in addition to that, you know, how do you know, with the things that you've just mentioned, how do you engage the readers and make sure they follow these investigative reports when so many people get their news and all their information from fourth-sentence tweets?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and that's, man, whoever figures that out is gonna, you know, that is the key. I think to some degree you're dependent on the idea that there are people who want that sort of journalism and seek it out. And obviously we try to do, like when we have a big project that comes out, we kind of have a social media campaign. So we'll be doing tweets and Facebook posts and sort of like building buzz for it. You know, we do that and you know, you hope it sort of catches fire a little bit. But I think the best stuff, people continue to find it. And the Silent Majority series did okay. I mean, when it first came out, it did okay. It didn't blow anybody away. But that project this year has gotten more page views in 2017 than it had in 2016 when it first came out. So it sort of has this long life, and like things of quality hopefully are still rise to the top in some way. It may not be as flashy a way, but have more staying power, because there's so much stuff out there and so many stories that blip for an afternoon and then you never hear from them again.
This congregation has quite a large emphasis on environmental issues, and that has been, especially in respect to the border wall, that has been covered in some areas, but not widely covered in the general press. So what were some of the problems you found with environmental issues in the border wall?
Well, you guys are probably aware that the first area that the Border Patrol is targeting for border wall in Texas is the Santa Ana Wildlife Refuge, which is the jewel of the refuge. And actually all up and down in Hidalgo and Starr County, a lot of those are protected areas. I'm actually heading down next week to Starr County, the Roma area, and there's a big birding festival going on at that time. So there's going to be bird all over the place, along the river. And they are getting to see, or they probably more than anyone understand what that wall would do. And there have been places, what's a little scary, I think, for people is that there have been places where Border Patrol has built a wall with a gate and said, this gate is going to be open, so you're going to have access. Sable Palm down in Brownsville, it's an amazing sanctuary. It currently has a gap to let people come in, and they're going to come in and they're going to build a gate. They're gating up there's 35 openings along the border, Texas border, that they're going to put gates in. We found a lot of places where those gates have not opened in months or years, and that over time those gates become walls. And then what happens on the other side is, like, there's this place near the Hidalgo pump house, if anybody's been down there, which is a big birding area. There used to be all kinds of trails that would lead down to the water. You see amazing bird species, and the gate has been put in and closed. And the land behind the gate has reverted back to feral land. The trails have been grown over, and those areas have become basically the land of, the only people who are back there are Border Patrol agents and smugglers. And so it's become a dangerous place where previously it had not been. Previously there was enough activity going on there that smugglers weren't really using it. But now that it's been basically shut off and abandoned, they're hiding out in these areas. And so that's sort of an extreme case of a piece of, like a wildlife sanctuary has become this scary, apocalyptic sort of place.
Jeremy, we have just a couple of minutes left, and so could you give us kind of some concluding remarks in the sense of all of these stories you mentioned are gut-wrenching and require a great deal of time and are ultimately very, very important. But what is the future for this kind of reporting as far as you're concerned?
I think the future is going to be okay. Regardless of what happens with the Statesman, I think the overall trend in journalism is towards longer form investigative pieces, but ever more specialized. So you have websites like Inside Climate News that does environmental climate change based reporting, but they are hiring investigative reporters from the Washington Post and like heavy hitters. So those websites, those nonprofit websites, have lifted up their game incredibly. And so in some ways, the future may lay in that sort of model. The newspaper for-profit model has supported investigative journalism for the last 6-7 years here in a major way. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the sale if we do get to continue that.
Well, with that possible sale and whatever might happen to the Austin American Statesman staff, does that mean that we might soon see your byline in Mother Jones?
I have no idea. It depends what they want to do with me. They may think 5 people is too much for an investigative team. It's an age of consolidation, and so, yeah, you never know.
Jeremy Schwartz, thank you for your presentation. Thank you. Thank you.